Hello, everyone. This is Keio University Global Engagement Office. Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon. Thank you for attending the Experience Japan Exhibition 2020 online. We welcome students and researchers thinking of opportunities to study in Japan. This is the first time the event is taking place online, although we've been running this program in the last 10 years. There is a message from the representative of this organizing this event from Professor Obi, Vice President for International Collaboration from Keio University. Please welcome Professor Obi. Professor Obi, over to you.
Yes, hello everyone. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are connecting from the world. Keio University is very proud of hosting this Experience Japan exhibition 2020 online. And the structure of this event is quite obvious, very clearly shown on the website. And at the beginning, we have 3 parallel sessions besides the university booth. And we will now start with the talk given by British Council Tokyo. Let me introduce the speaker today. This is Mr. Jamie Gibbings. He's a Deputy Director of British Council Tokyo and at the same time Director of English Language Services here in Japan. He has come to Asia in the year 2000, starting with the manager at the Singapore office. And after that, he moved to Taiwan. And now he's working in Tokyo office. So he is an expert in Asian region already. He's going to provide us with the activity of British Council, but not limited to British Council, but the meaning of study abroad, particularly in Japan. After his talk, we expect to receive questions from the audience. So please raise your questions using the chat function of this Zoom. I think you are familiar with this already. So let me, please join me to welcome Mr. Jamie Gibbings. So Jamie, time is yours and please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Obi, for that kind introduction, and good evening, everybody from Tokyo. It is evening here, it's just gone 6 p.m. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm just going to share my screen now, and as you can see, the title of my talk is Cultural Relations, Trust and Opportunities. And what I'm actually going to do first is tell you a little bit about what I'm not going to be talking about. I'm not going to be talking about formal diplomacy. I'm not talking about trade agreements, although you may have seen in the news that the UK has just signed a specific free trade agreement with Japan. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm not talking about government administrations or policies. I'm going to be talking about the powers of attraction that bring ordinary people with different backgrounds together at a human level through language, the arts, education, and perhaps above all of that, shared aspiration. I'm going to be talking about the sharing of ideas and actions for mutual benefit, about people-led exchanges, and the power of individuals working together to shape the relationships between cultures and countries. And that's what the British Council does. And as Professor Obi said, I'll tell you a little bit about my organisation in a moment. A bit about myself, as Professor Obi kindly said, I've been in the East Asia region for 20 years. This is actually my second time living and working in Japan. I came here in 2016, and before that, I was lucky enough to be helping lead the British Council's work in Taiwan and Singapore, as the introduction mentioned. But my first real experience living and working in a foreign culture was here in Japan about 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, as part of the JET program. One of the strengths, I think, of the JET program is that it really creates a network of advocates for Japan. And I notice that all the time in my work here in Tokyo, but also around Japan. When I'm meeting people who are working in Japan or working with Japan, whether it's in government or in the private sector, you come across a lot of ex-JETs or a lot of people who, like yourselves on the call today, have studied in Japan or are intending to study in Japan. So I have no doubt that many of you will be doing that in the future. What is the British Council? Many of you may have heard the name. We work in over 100 different countries worldwide. We've been in Japan specifically since 1953. And as I mentioned, we build people to people and institution to institution relationships. Now, you notice I don't say government to government relationships. That tends to be the role of traditional diplomatic institutions such as the embassy, which we do work with, but we deal in what is often called soft power diplomacy, or the term I prefer is cultural relations. As you can see on the slide, the British Council was originally founded to create what was called at the time a friendly knowledge and understanding between the people of the UK and the wider world. And I think it's certainly my belief, and I think it's fair to say that that founding purpose is as valid today as it was when we were first established in 1934. A quick slide here on who we work with, what we share, and our purpose. I'll let you read through that without me talking over it for a couple of moments. So ultimately, our job is to make a positive contribution to the countries that we work with by using the cultural resources of the UK, such as art, sport, education, science, culture, language, and creativity, and by sharing our values and our way of life. And we believe our work makes a lasting difference to the UK's international standing by increasing our influence and networks with important decision makers, influencers, and the wider public globally. It increases UK prosperity by encouraging more education exchange, trade, investment, tourism. It helps to keep the UK safe and secure by reducing extremism and improving stability and security in strategically important and often volatile countries. Again, bear in mind, there's over 100 countries in the world where we work in. And it also increases our influence by growing the number of people who know and trust the UK. I'm just going to briefly talk about the difference between cultural relations and traditional diplomacy. There's a quote here about traditional diplomacy, which I'll let you read. There's a similar quote to this attributed to Churchill when he says, diplomacy is the art of telling someone to go to hell and having them thank you and ask for directions, or I'm paraphrasing. Whereas cultural relations is a more subtle and complex piece. I'll let you read that one. In other words, cultural relations is an ongoing conversation between nations. It's fluid, it has wider goals. So if you think of traditional diplomacy as being about winning an argument, cultural relations is about giving both parties a voice. Obviously, as the British Council, we want to get a good outcome for the UK, but we always need to create mutual benefit. Indeed, if we look around the world today, many of the shared challenges that we face, COVID probably being the most obvious example, can really only be solved through more international cooperation and the building of trust between countries. Trust is what we deal in ultimately. Trust fosters robust, mutually beneficial relationships. Trust is essential in business and diplomacy. And when it exists between parties, there's a much better chance of reaching an amicable, lasting agreement when entering into negotiations. And the effects of trust are measurable. A few years ago, using data from member states of the EU, some Dutch academics formally modeled the impact of increased trust on both levels of trade and levels of foreign direct investment, or FDI. And the results show that when mutual trust between the populations of two countries increases by 1%, exports also increase by 0.6%, and FDI also increases significantly if all other things are equal. And trust lowers the cost of doing business as well. You spend less time on negotiation when both parties already understand and have faith in one another, and when the exchanging parties trust another to deliver on their promises and their commitments. That reduces the transactional costs that are needed for insurance policies of some kind. And finally, a country's soft power has measurable effects on its exports as well. Countries that are admired for their positive global influence export more. It's the attractiveness of the country's culture and its way of life that drives business links. Being seen as a force for good has a direct economic payoff. For example, if we look at higher education, which of course is relevant to all of you on the call today, studies show that those who rate the UK highly as a place to study also tend to rate the UK highly for its opportunities for business and trade. So we work hard with universities to help attract more than 350,000 foreign students to the UK every year. And using British Council services means that they're more likely to choose the UK as their destination. So there's a financial benefit, but there's also the more intangible, abstract benefit of building relationships between nations and making our campuses in the UK more diverse and exciting places to learn. And of course, when you come to Japan to study, we'll be doing the reverse. So on that slide, it's perhaps clearest to see the impact of this by the fact that over 50 of the current world leaders, representing 1 in 4 countries globally, have been educated in the UK at some stage. There's a quote there from a study we did called Culture at Work. I'll just let you read that because this is, of course, key to the theme of today's event. So our work in international education exchange has a direct benefit on young people's ability to compete globally through the skills that they acquire. And it also strengthens companies through employing a wide range of diverse intercultural skills. This study, Culture at Work, we did this a few years ago, and it found that one of the things employers most value in their staff is an international outlook. And that means language skills, but it also means an openness to the world beyond national borders, a willingness to consider that there might be other ways of doing things, an ability to get inside the minds of other people from different cultural backgrounds. And this has huge benefits in terms of improved ability for firms to access international markets, but it also supports innovation, creativity, and better team working as well. So when you do come to Japan for your studies, of course, you'll have a chance to learn the language, but you'll also be able to develop your intercultural fluency, which is what that Culture at Work study key pointed as being one of the things employers are really looking at. Intercultural fluency is not something Google Translate or AI is going to be able to replicate anytime soon. And we want young people in the UK to learn more languages and to think more internationally. And of course, many of you on this call today are shining examples of that. Let me just give you a moment to read this slide, because while language, education, and the arts are probably the most obvious cultural exports, our values and our ideas are equally powerful. So let me give you a moment to read what we mean by equality, diversity, and inclusion. A lot of our work in Japan focuses on the importance of equality, diversity, and inclusion. These are central to our understanding of cultural relations. We sometimes say it's part of our DNA. You can't be part of a cultural relations agenda without understanding and using EDI in your work, mainstreaming it. We take action to embed EDI within our organizational culture and in our programs and our products and our services. We focus on age, disability, gender, race and ethnicity, religion and belief, sexual orientation, but we appreciate these areas don't stand alone, they intersect. And we use tools to track our own progress and seek feedback and guidance from staff and external advisory groups. To be clear, our role here is not to lecture Japan on any of this, but rather to share the diversity of the UK as one of its strengths. For example, last month when we celebrated Black History Month in the UK, we did a series here of online events with Japanese participants that got a fantastic response. And again, this is about mutual benefit, because we believe a commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion will also help Japan become an even stronger role model in the international community, as hugely respected as it already is. I think I'm going to pause there and open it up to any questions. I've told you a little bit about our work at the British Council. I hope I've given you some context on the international skills that are going to be so useful for you, both during your studies, but also beyond that. But if anyone has any questions about either the British Council, cultural relations, or soft power in a wider sense, or indeed about what it's like living in Japan right now, or even 20 years ago, I'm happy to answer any questions as best I can. So Professor Obi, could I pass back to you?
Yes, thank you very much, Jamie, for giving a very nice talk. Actually, as one of former international student myself, I join your opinion very much. I spent more than 5 years in Germany, more than 30 years now. And that experience changed totally my life and my career path, yes. And while waiting for some questions from the audience, I'd like to have some conversation with you regarding all this soft skill development by study abroad. You mentioned as a part of your experience in Japan, you were participating in JET program. That was not to study in Japan, but you teach English language among Japanese high school, I think. And what did you learn by yourself by teaching English to Japanese people that time?
So yes, this was in summer 2000 that I came. I was living I wasn't in Tokyo, I was in quite a rural area, in a rural prefecture. And yes, as you say, I was teaching English. I was teaching in Japanese junior high schools and elementary schools. and I was teaching alongside Japanese teachers. We were team teaching. So I think that was the first thing, is that I was on a daily basis collaborating with people from a completely different culture and a linguistic background. My Japanese was very basic when I came. I like to think it got a lot better, but it was definitely basic when I came. And collaborating on a daily basis with a very fixed goal. Okay, we've got this lesson coming up. We need to, hit these lesson names, or we need to make sure the students can do this. It was quite a focused and quite intense experience. I was the only, to the best of my knowledge, the only non-Japanese, well, I was certainly the only non-Japanese member of staff in the school. I think at the time I was the only non-Japanese person living in the town. It was a small town. I had grown up in a very homogenous environment. I had grown up in a small village in southeast England. But interestingly, my parents they ran a guest house when I was growing up. So although my immediate environment was very homogenous, I actually met people from all over the world who were coming to stay for short periods of time. And I think that had a massive influence on me when I was very young. I already had that sort of innate interest in other cultures and other languages. And again, I think perhaps the experience on JET was about trying to sort of harness that interest to reach specific goals in terms of work. I had already traveled and had friendships and relationships and lots of sort of, if you like, informal experience internationally, but I had not been in a work situation. So I think that was the biggest learning. It's one thing to socialize with people from another culture. It's one thing to go on holiday. It's another thing to be working alongside them in sometimes quite intense, pressurized situations to achieve a specific goal.
I see. Thank you very much. You had a very rich experience in Japanese society already. And we have many interesting questions. Among others, let me pick up one. What particular intercultural soft skill should students be learning to succeed in the Japanese job market?
And as I mentioned in the talk, it's it's very important to have some language skills. Not even necessarily if your job requires it. In fact, increasingly there are Japanese employers that are using English as their first language, as their language in the company. But to, I think, send a message that you're there to learn as much as to give. So I do think some basic language skills are essential, as much as anything else, to communicate your approach to living abroad and your interest in learning about the language and the culture. In terms of the soft skills, I think we touched on negotiation in the speech, or the brief talk that I just gave. And by negotiation, I don't necessarily mean business negotiations. It could be negotiating with a colleague on how the best way to do something is. I think that's an important soft skill and is linked to intercultural fluency, because decision-making and negotiation can be quite different in different cultures. Of course, it will always depend on the individual to some extent, but I have experienced people from other cultures who have sometimes found or voiced frustration with the decision-making in either a traditionally Japanese organization or in a foreign organization, but that has a lot of Japanese stuff. It's a bit of a cliche to say that the Japanese value consensus. That's a kind of thing that's thrown around quite casually, but I think there is some truth to that. So I think being open to different forms of negotiation, being ready to, in a way, be part of what might seem a more group-orientated decision-making process, I think is important, and I think will stand you in good stead in team working in general, but particularly in Japan. I think the other thing to say is that, you know, there's a saying that once someone's been in Japan for a week, they feel like they could write a book about it, and once they've been here for 20 years, they feel like they could probably write a couple of lines. I think knowing what you don't know is always a virtue, and part of intercultural fluency, I think, is accepting that you're not going to be fluent, and that you need to constantly be listening and watching and observing, and not apologizing for the ways of doing things in your own culture, because that's what you bring to the table, but recognizing that you need to have your radar up and be observant about how people behave and how you can contribute to that and fit into that whilst staying true to yourself and being your authentic self.
Thank you very much. And there is one question more specific to maybe related to your experience. How do you think the average person, student, jets, artists, and general working bodies can contribute to cultural exchange who aren't necessarily within the field of business or science?
I think all of those are examples, prime examples of what we call people-to-people exchange. And often those are the most powerful. Again, if I was to touch on JETS, I think what's interesting about JET, or again, people who will come and do a degree or a master's or research in Japan, obviously that time that they spend here is incredibly powerful, but they carry the experience with them. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of them will become advocates, or if you like, you know, unofficial cultural ambassadors of Japan. And that is one of Japan's, if you like, I don't particularly like the phrase, but one of their soft power assets is that people carry that with them, even if they're not physically in Japan. So how can you do it? You can work with people from other countries. You can learn from, so if you're in a creative industry, you can look at how something is done in a different country or a different culture, and maybe there are opportunities to incorporate that into your way of doing things. I think, again, I don't think you have to be part of a government program or a big business collaboration to be part of cultural exchange. Far from it, in fact. Often the most powerful exchanges are happening on those individual levels. So I would say go out, build relationships, do research, find out what you're interested in, try to meet the people that you think are the right people to meet. There are lots of networks, obviously a lot of it is online at the moment, but there are a lot of cultural networks, whether they're alumni associations or things led by cultural offices that you can become part of. So that's what I would start with. I wouldn't wait to be invited to be part of a big program to become part of cultural exchange. You can be part of cultural exchange.
I see. Thank you.
Yourself.
Thank you very much. I think you have already answered to the next question, but which I have in mind. But what do you think students can do now at the moment to try to increase our intercultural fluency? So at the moment means at home without traveling, I think.
Yes. And again, I think there are a lot of opportunities. Some of those things that I've just mentioned, those networking platforms are obviously online. You know, the fact that you're here today is a start. If we go back to the language, there's a lot of online opportunities to learn Japanese now, whether it's with a tutor online or whether it's self-study, and you know that's not hard to find online. So I think you can be doing some of that. In terms of building those people-to-people connections, yeah, that is undoubtedly harder in a virtual world. But I think what you can be doing is equipping yourself by reading around the trends in cultural diplomacy, in international relationships, and thinking ahead, thinking, okay, what are people going to want more of when we are able to get on aeroplanes again? And how am I going to be part of that conversation? There's a ton of interesting reading that you could be using this opportunity to do. There are obviously academic texts, but there are more accessible texts. There's a new book that was released a couple of months ago called Soft Power by Robert Winder. I'd highly recommend that. It's a very, very accessible book, and it talks about Japan in several chapters and about the UK. So I would say read, study a language, take opportunities online for networking where you can, and think ahead strategically about, okay, when in-person cultural relations is back on the menu again, how do I want to be part of that? And then work backwards from that. What do I need to do to be ready?
Okay, thank you, thank you. So you say there are many things the student can do at home already. And related to that, next question would be, is there any benefit to studying at the Japanese university in comparison to studying Japanese at the British Russell Group University? So now, is there any reason to go to Japan if you can study something already at home?
Well, again, I think it goes back to what I mentioned in the speech. Learning a language is not just about knowing the verbs and the vocabulary or the kanji in this case. And again, I don't think AI or Google Translate is ever going to be able to replace a human being who is adept at working and communicating and living in different cultures or working with people from different cultures. So for me, I don't think you can compare the two. And that's not to diminish the great advantages of a lot of high quality online language learning options. But it's you can't compare that to the human experience of living, learning, collaborating and working in a different country, and specifically with people from different cultures.
Good. Because of the time limitation, we cannot pick up too many questions, but there is some personal questions to you. How did you move your career from teaching to working for the British Council?
Well, one of the things the British Council does, and I joined the British Council in Singapore, but one of the things that we do is teach English. And obviously at the moment, we're doing a lot of online teaching because this all feeds into cultural relations, as we've been talking about. Language and language ability is a key part of all of this. So my first degree was in education, and I originally was a language teacher for the British Council. And then I gradually got involved in different aspects of the work. I have a background in the arts as well, and that kind of fed together. And then over the 20 years since then, it's a career that's taken me into a couple of different areas. But I mean, I am still involved in our English programs and our education programs because that is a key part of cultural relations.
I see, thank you. So since you started your career in Japan 20 years ago, what do you see the difference in Japan?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I had 15 years away from Japan. So I was here in the early 2000s on the JET program as a much younger man straight out of university, and then came back a few years ago, as a father and a man in his 40s. And this time was living in Tokyo, whereas 20 years ago was living in, as I said earlier, a rural area. So they were very, very different experiences. The first thing to say when I compare those two, i.e. a rural area 20 years ago to Tokyo today in 2020, is Tokyo, I think, is now far more international and far more cosmopolitan than people realize. People who've never been, I think, still picture Tokyo as being a very homogenous place. And statistically, the Japanese population overall is homogenous, but Tokyo is not. Tokyo is diverse, it's vibrant in terms of the faces that you see, the languages that you hear spoken, the foods that you can buy. I could go on and on and on. So that is a massive difference in terms of my immediate environment, completely different. I think it's fair to say, going back to the language thing, 20 years ago, being able to communicate in English effectively was considered a very nice thing to have, and, you know, made you rather special, in all honesty. I think increasingly now it's expected, or certainly something that a lot of people expect you to do if you are going to have some sort of international career. And one of the things about the new, you know, if you like, the new world that we're all living in, is that more Japanese people are now communicating with foreigners through their work than they were before. Previously, it tended to be more senior Japanese people that went abroad on business trips, who got on a plane and went for 5 days to the UK, to Australia, etc., etc. Now, because a lot of international conversations are happening on Zoom, we're actually finding that people who wouldn't have had the chance opportunities before to get involved in, you know, meetings, discussions, collaborations on an international level are now doing that, and they're doing that in English. So, you know, the flip side of, you know, the kind of the break that COVID has put on a lot of international exchange is that the switch to online has actually brought a lot of people to the, you know, the international cultural relations party, if you like, and that is predominantly in English. So it's getting more and more important for Japanese people to be able to communicate in English.
Thank you very much. So the conversation, I enjoyed personally also the conversation very much, but because of the time constraint, we have to conclude this first session of Explore Japan activity today. Thank you, Jamie, again. And your experience in Tokyo is very valuable for everyone, I think, who participate today's session. And I hope everyone could come to Japan physically, and we look forward to welcome all of you someday here in Tokyo or elsewhere in Japan. And I'm very sorry that we couldn't pick up all the questions, but as I see, many of the questions could be already answered by visiting booths of other universities and organizations. So please make maximum use of your time during 2 hours and some minutes from now to explore the possibility of studying or working in Japan. Thank you very much again, and enjoy your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.